All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Sunday School Dropouts Podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Yes, this is going to be a great episode. Before we get into it, I wanted to kind of set this episode up a little bit because I really loved that one of the things that we have done this season in talking about purity culture is that we've talked about so many different aspects connected to purity culture that don't normally get talked about. We're talking about purity culture and neurodivergence. We're talking about it, what it looks like in real life with, deconstructing as a pastor's wife. We're talking about it, like how purity culture still shows up in our lives, even if we've left it behind. And I think these are important conversations to have. And I say all of that because today we're going to talk about something that I don't think we've ever broached on this podcast before. And that's like the connection between purity culture and chronic disease, chronic pain, autoimmune issues, things like that, which I think at the outset of it, people are like, no way, right? Like that can't be connected. There's no research. And I think in some ways they'd be right. I don't know if there's direct research. I don't know, Andrew, maybe you've done some, or maybe you've found some, but I don't know if there's direct research on purity culture might lead to chronic illnesses or chronic disease, autoimmune issues. I don't know of any research like that, but I do know of a lot of research like that. We call it like triangulated, where we understand that purity culture can cause these types of symptoms, and these symptoms or these environments over time can lead to chronic issues or autoimmune issues. So we triangulate that research to kind of bring that together. But I don't know, Andrew, what have you heard any specific?
I need to deep dive that, to be fair. Directly, no, I don't know of any directly with purity culture to this, but like what you're saying, there's a very high positive correlation. And then also, folks who grew up in high control systems, purity culture type systems, do oftentimes end up exemplifying a lot of the things that are laid out in such instruments as the ACE questionnaire, the adverse childhood experiences, for example, which was a massive study that they did that really made the correlation between adverse childhood experiences and long-term negative health outcomes over the lifespan. So that does have a lot of research behind it, and I do really see, the more we've really unpacked purity culture and how it shows up in folks' nervous system and can, result in complex trauma. That's how we've kind of linked it all together.
Yeah. And I think it's, when we look at things from a physiological standpoint, we think of things like purity culture and high control religion, where there's a lot of hypervigilance. We're constantly activated because we're, having to follow rules, or we're afraid of punishments or consequences. Or in the case of purity culture, if you grew up as a woman, you're constantly having to watch what you wear to make sure that men don't stumble or things like that. And when that happens, our nervous system never has a chance to kind of come back to a baseline of safety. We're always braced. We're always ready for danger. And so if you're watching on the YouTube, you might even see me, kind of bracing, and you can see my shoulders are going up and kind of my arms are coming in. There's not a lot of movement. And we know that in situations like complex trauma, like over time, when that's how our body is having to operate under that constant bracing, constant stress, constant activation, our body has long-term impacts that come up. And there is research that directly correlates complex trauma and chronic issues, autoimmune issues, things like that. So I think it's really common then that when we put like high control religion, we've kind of always said is under that umbrella of complex trauma. We can put purity culture in there too. It makes a lot of sense that people then coming out of these environments might experience long-term or chronic issues, including chronic pain, including autoimmune issues, including, chronic sickness, illness, disease. And it's not something that's talked about a lot. And the connection isn't made frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm glad that we are now making that connection and talking about it more. Absolutely. It's a very necessary conversation to have, I think.
So that's our little precursor. We're going to be talking to Nicole Clifton today, who is a practitioner at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery. Chronic pain, autoimmune issues, and chronic disease are things that she specializes in addition to complex trauma. So we thought she would be a great person to come in and share a little bit about her own story and figuring out those correlations between chronic pain and purity culture, as well as then talk about how she works with clients who are navigating the same. Before we get into it, we have a couple, listener stories and questions questions. And I'm going to just offer the disclaimer that we do at the beginning of every episode, that we recognize that some of the topics and discussions that we have in any episode might bring up feelings, emotions, and triggers that may require more processing or be too much to handle right now. So please always feel free to skip any episode or parts of episodes and come back if and when you are ready. Our goal is to help you trust your own body and lived experience so you can take what you need and leave what you don't.
So one of our listener stories says, I was the mom in the 90s telling my daughter she couldn't wear crop tops or spaghetti straps or short shorts. I have one daughter and 5 sons. I did not have the conversation with my boys. I feel so much shame around raising my kids in purity culture. Thank you for giving me a place to share this.
I, as a kid growing up in the 90s, so, having parents that were also raising me in the 90s, I really appreciate this mom coming in to say that. I think so many times the ability to take accountability and apologize, it doesn't erase some of the things that have happened, but it does a lot to open up conversation, healing, repair, things like that. So I think that there's a lot of people that grew up like this that are really like it feels really redemptive, I think, to hear a parent say that. And so I'm really appreciative of that. I'm appreciative of, as somebody who grew up with brothers and I was the only girl, I can really resonate with your daughter and, all and those conversations happening quite frequently and having a lot of confusion around, why do my brothers get to wear tight clothing, but I can't, or, things like that. And it just never sat right with me. But I can really appreciate that you are sharing this story, and thank you for your authenticity and the accountability. I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah. Just being willing to talk about it. Like, that's huge. A lot of parents never were willing to. So
yeah. Kudos. All right. So we've got a couple listener questions for us today. And the first one is, how do I stop intellectualizing everything and actually feel something different in my body? Ooh, easy peasy. Just do it. Just kidding. Just stop it and do it.
It's like, have you considered not intellectualizing?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a common one for folks who've come out of like any high control system, because I think intellectualizing was actually a way that we learned to stay safe. So I think we have a part of us that is very adept at doing that. So how do you, stop doing that and actually feel something different? I mean, it's going to start in very, very, very small steps, I think. And I would just start by there's like somatic experiencing, for example, a polyvagal theory too, has a lot of really good, very accessible exercises, because it's really just to start learning and start recognizing things that your body's feeling.
Yeah.
And you don't have to attach meaning to it. There doesn't have to be like, why am I feeling this? Who cares? You notice that you're feeling it. That's what we're looking at. We're not trying to make meaning as to why, or should you be feeling this, or what does that mean? It's just literally, I'm noticing that I'm kind of hungry right now. My stomach kind of feels gurgly or something, or I'm noticing tension in my chest. It doesn't matter why. We can maybe do that exercise later, but for the very first foundational piece, it doesn't matter. And I think sometimes just starting with the very small basics like that, I think, is kind of the right trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would echo the same thing. Like, looking at what are the things that we would naturally do in our daily lives, whether that's eating when we're hungry, using the restroom when we need to go to the bathroom, going to sleep when we're tired. And it's not, again, about making meaning, but it's just noticing, like, I'm tired, or I need to use the restroom. And you can go deeper into that. What in my body tells me that I'm tired? How do I know when I feel refreshed? What in my body tells me I need to go to the bathroom? Get granular about that. Because a lot of people say, I just know that I have to go. Okay, well, what in your body? It's like, oh, my leg is bouncing up and down, or maybe I'm starting to feel a little irritated with somebody, or I feel a fullness in my lower abdomen. And it's just kind of getting yourself acquainted with different sensations. And again, not making meaning out of it, but just starting to notice what's coming up in your body. And that can start to then replace having to make all of the meaning, and just giving yourself a different somatic, which is body, experience. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have another listener question here, and it says, why does this still affect me decades later?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm going to assume that this means purity culture, just for the sake of this episode. And, I think the reason being is that when we are when this is ingrained, when this is embodied in us, it's not a matter of just like forgetting it. It's like our bodies and brains never unlearn something. We always are going to have the knowledge of that or the memory of that. It's just giving that less weight, giving that less, kind of attention, things like that. And so I think part of the struggle with things like complex trauma, which I feel like most purity culture survivors kind of fit with that definition of complex trauma, I think it's not so much as like getting over every single little thing that ever happened. I think it's allowing the past to be integrated into your present. So it's recognizing, oh, here's this thing that still might be affecting me. And instead of judging yourself or criticizing yourself for that, getting curious and leaning in and figuring out, what do I need right now that maybe I didn't have back then? Or is there something I could do different or a different choice I could make? And that's like the part of somatic experiencing I like a lot. That's talking about the integration, bringing the past into the present. So we're not living in the past. We're kind of updating it a little bit. But I think with complex trauma, there's just no way that we're ever going to be able to sift through every single trigger that we could ever have, because we just don't know. It was our life. It's how we grew up. It was consistent, persistent, overwhelm, unescapable. And so it makes sense to me that this still impacts us decades later. Maybe not to the same degree, but it still does. So yeah, Andrew, what do you think?
Yeah. Interestingly, it actually makes me think of the other question we just touched on. I know it's not the same person asking the question, but
Yeah.
the idea of intellectualizing the why does this still affect me? The why, sometimes we can get in the weeds on the why, because sometimes that even itself is an intellectualizing question where we're trying to make meaning as to why we're struggling with something. I think it's suffice to say, why is it matters. Something important
Yeah.
that you needed didn't happen. It matters. There was pain there. There was grief there. I don't necessarily know, but I would be more curious to change that why to a what. Like, what is it that's affecting me decades later? So in other words, what actually, so when you say this affects me decades later, okay, what are you actually noticing that's telling you that something is affecting you at all? Like, what does that mean? What is actually happening? And maybe it's like, okay, well, every time this particular subject comes up, I'm noticing like a constriction in my chest and I can't take a deep breath. Like my throat feels tight. I feel really disoriented and like brain foggy or irritable or, things like that. Rather than explaining why you feel that way, I would just simply be curious about the what and
Yeah,
start
that's really good.
and really just start there,
Yeah.
because there's nothing wrong with what you're feeling. You're feeling it. I truly believe you're feeling it for a reason, that your body's inherently good and it's just trying to keep you safe. So if we can get past the why, I would just gently shift it to a what and
Yeah.
start there.
Yeah. I love that. So good. All right. We have one more listener story for this episode. And they say, I gave and received oral sex with my boyfriend for the first time when I was 18. I was about to go to college to major in ministry and was 1000% sure I just lost my salvation and secured my spot in hell. LOL. Ooh, I hear ya.
I love the casual
Yeah.
little LOL. Like, yeah, I just
LOL. Yeah.
damned myself for eternity. Funny though. It's funny
Yeah.
joke.
I
But
know.
also, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
On a sidebar, I saw a whole meme about why is it that millennials? I'm assuming this is a millennial. You may not be, and I apologize
Probably.
if you're not. But what is it about us with like always dropping LOL when it's really not actually funny? It's kind of sad, and I'm sorry that
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that's just. I mean, that's what purity culture and high control systems do.
Mhm.
The black and white, all or nothing way of approaching sexuality, what's appropriate, what's not. Because the fact of the matter is, I mean, I'm assuming you were both legal adults and consenting adults.
Mhm.
What's the problem? Literally nothing
Yeah.
happened. That was wrong.
Mhm.
Fine.
Yeah.
Cool. You're just
Yeah.
exploring and experimenting with your sexuality, and that's perfectly okay.
Mhm.
And I also understand that that is not the programming that we were given.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that idea of losing your salvation for committing any sort of sexual act outside of marriage, like that is, yeah, it's so common. I know we've joked,
yeah.
we've laughed, in other episodes about like wondering, oh, I held hands with somebody. Does that mean I'm pregnant? Right. And it sounds so silly maybe on the outside of it, but I think those were very real things that we were taught to fear and to think that these things could really happen if we did the wrong thing, if we engaged in these sexual activities prior to marriage or somebody other than our future spouse. And so even though we can be like, yeah, LOL, it's also like, oh, but that's, it's not an LOL because that was very real. So anyways, I just appreciate the authenticity.
Yeah, me too.
Yes. Thanks for sharing. Nicole Clifton is a coach specializing in faith deconstruction, healing from purity culture, religious trauma, and LGBTQIA plus identity, as well as supporting clients through life transitions, boundaries, chronic illness, ableism, and body image challenges. Drawing from her own journey of questioning and healing within the Christian church, Nicole integrates internal family systems, mindfulness, and attachment-informed approaches to help individuals reconnect with themselves and move towards wholeness.
With nearly a decade of experience working in Christian university settings and personal experience navigating the intersections of faith, identity, and trauma, she creates compassionate spaces for clients to explore and heal. Nicole lives with her husband, enjoys musical theater, reading, and indulging in Disney and Harry Potter, and is an avid fan of personality tests.
Welcome to the Sunday School Dropouts podcast, Nicole. It is so wonderful to have you here today.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yes. I'm glad. First time Sunday School Dropout. We're excited that you're here, and it's going to be a great conversation. So I know we're going to be talking about, purity culture, chronic pain, all sorts of really interesting topics. But before we get into that, I wonder if you can just share with us a little bit about your own experience inside of high control religion and purity culture, just to kind of set the stage.
Sure. So I grew up in a Christian household. Both of my parents had some of their own religious background, but it wasn't they went through a period in their, teenage, young adult years where it wasn't a super big focus for them. But after my brother and I were born, they really decided, to commit to the Christian family thing. So we were hyper involved at church, right? As kids, we were in all the children's ministry things. My parents served on a gajillion committees and on boards. And yeah, it just was a pretty big part of our life. I went to Christian school in elementary school, including a couple of years homeschooled in some of those good Christian homeschool curriculums. I did go to a performing arts high school, which is so wild. I think just because I was very musical and things like that, my parents were open to me getting to have a different experience, which I'm very thankful for now as an adult. I was then as well, but I have a different perspective on it now, as opposed to many of my friends who've done Christian school all the way through thing. But yeah, even once I was not going to Christian school, right? It was but you need to be super committed at church and stay involved in youth group and be a part of leadership and be on the worship team and do all of these things. So I still had the strong Christian foundation, and your youth group friends should be your main friends, right? So that you're not influenced by the world and all of those things. I definitely think back to I had my own, I think I picked my own purity ring. I didn't have the whole my dad gave me a purity ring thing, but I was motivated, right? My own choice. And again, we can say choice with air quotes because clearly there was lots of influence and pressure about doing the right thing. But yeah, I picked my own purity ring. Laura and I think we've laughed about this before, listening to Wait For Me by Rebecca St. James, right? And just being so caught up in the music and the meaning of it when you're 13 years old, thinking that that's the thing you should be doing. I went to a Girls of Grace conference, right? And the whole majority of that is talking about modesty and purity culture and yada, yada. In my house, purity culture, the values were clearly there, but we didn't talk about it a lot, which is really interesting, right? So I remember having the initial sex talk before I went to, non-Christian junior high so that my mother could be the first person to give me the initial information. But we really didn't talk about it a lot. I got another talk the night of my senior prom, but then again, we didn't directly talk about it. It just was it's very intimate to sleep in the same bed as someone. So make sure that you're making good choices, or it was a very odd thing. And then we hit it again right after I got engaged as make sure you get on birth control quickly if you don't want to be pregnant. I was so it was very sparse, but the values, right? The expectation was there. They didn't have to talk about it a lot in order to reinforce directly that this was the expectation. I remember, I always use the example of one of the three stereotypical films in Christianity that I feel a lot of cis men really love, right? Is Braveheart, The Patriot. What's the other one I always love?
All the Mel
Gladiator.
Gibson films. Oh yeah, Gladiator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gladiator. That's the other one.
I'm
That's
just pulling
exactly
off of
it, Andrew.
all the John Eldridge examples.
100%. That's it. In Braveheart, right? So it's there's all this violence happening in the movie. So in high school, I was allowed to watch that, right? But it's we have to skip the sex scene. That
Yes.
was the indicative piece of like, even if we weren't directly getting the messages, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
overtly, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. It's not like my mom said that to us every week, right? But like the reinforcement was like, we don't talk about this. And clearly what we all know, right? Like just because you don't talk about something doesn't mean you're not sending negative messaging about it, right? This is not okay to talk about. And so I think that it was so then I did end up going to Christian college, and that was certainly, Southern Baptist in origin, and, the MRS degree, jokes and the ring by spring. I'd never heard of any of those things before, thankfully. But it was like so prevalent when I started dating my husband, because we were that couple. We started dating. I married my college sweetheart. We were together 2 weeks, and people are like, is it hard to keep your hands off each other? Are you going to get married soon? Like, it just was so quick of like, do you know if he's the one? And I mean, even back then, like, it just was
Did
so
you
fast.
know?
Of, like, no, I didn't. And I don't believe in the one anyways. Even back then, I dashed all their poor little hearts. I was like, I don't believe in the one. They're like, how can you not believe in the one, right? God's plan for your life. I'm like, I think you can be compatible with lots of people. So yeah, I think it was funny that like even in those spaces, I would have considered myself more, I'll use the word liberal now. I wouldn't have used the word liberal then. I guess the fancy Christian word for that, egalitarian, right? Compared to most of the complementarian theology that was present at my college. But I think of that concept. I mean, lots of people talk about it, but like I'm thinking about Glennon Doyle, right? Canary in the coal mine. Like, even if you think to yourself, like, I don't know if I buy into like the whole package that everybody is talking about over here, you're still breathing in the toxins in the atmosphere. And so through, right, things that I had carried my whole life, even if I thought in college I didn't believe all of those things, I was still in that environment and breathing that stuff in all the time. And so when I did get married right after college, and surprise, surprise, you can't do the like, get married, put the ring on, flip the switch, and then sex is amazing and everything's awesome. And like all this shame started flooding out of nowhere that I was like, I don't know where this came from.
Yeah.
But all of the seeds that had been planted for years and years and years and years still had such an impact, even though, again, I would have seen myself as not as conservative as my peers. And it's still like there's just been so many layers and so many seasons of work of having to like unpack how deeply trenched some of that purity culture messaging is.
Yeah. I really resonate with what you're saying about like breathing in the toxins, even if it's not overt. Because I think there's so many people whose like parents didn't have these overt conversations, or was like a one and done, right? So they weren't like even overtly pushing these messages, but you just picked it up. I think that's such a good way of saying it. I really resonate with that.
Yeah.
Same. Like that impressed me as well. And that was my experience too. It wasn't really talked about explicitly that much. It was honestly this implicit shame and secrecy and fear, really, is what I remember feeling the most.
Yeah.
Also, it's nice to meet somebody who did the Christian school experience and a few years of homeschool, like both. I feel like there's not a lot of us who did a little bit of both. I did 3 years of homeschool in the middle of, anyway, my middle school experience was basically homeschooling. So
yeah. It's an interesting, unique mix. I feel like that not everybody gets these different pockets of like, educational experiences, which, especially now, again, I am thankful for some balance of like, I had this and a little bit of mix up.
Yeah, absolutely. But so we've started touching on it, like just all of the things that aren't not explicitly said, but end up being embodied. So to that point, how did purity culture shape your relationship with your body? Like, what messages did you receive that you internalized, and just about your body and needs and desires, all of that?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about it because I was like, were there any positive messages? And I realized that like, I am grateful. I do think my mom was one of those women that didn't do a lot of like her own body shaming, or at least in front of us. So I don't feel like I picked up on a lot of that, which was good. But I was thinking like, even in terms of like the 2 verses that came to mind, right, that always get used as like your body is like fearfully and wonderfully made, and that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. And so I was like, I mean, I guess those were positive-ish, but I even realized that even in naming those, right, it introduced that concept of cognitive dissonance because while there may have been these two verses that are used in this kind of like positive context, there were still caveats to that. There were still rules to that. There was still like high expectations for how you needed to treat your body because it was this positive thing. But also, it was still the minority of the messaging. The majority of the messaging was, right, the flesh is sinful, right? The heart is deceitful. Your body is, not to be trusted, especially like for women, right? Like you're a temptation, you're a stumbling block. You need to be hyper vigilant at all times about how somebody else could perceive you that could make them sin. And so I think way more was this concept of like, yeah, you just need to be aware all the time because at some point, like this liability is waiting for you in every moment, in every scenario, in every situation. And so when you pair that with like what we had already kind of talked about, like it's inappropriate, like even if we don't directly say it, I think women get the just inside high control religion, but society in general, right? Like, don't talk about body hair or bodily functions or any of those types of things, right? It's unladylike or unfeminine. And so it just adds to that whisper effect, right? We don't talk about these things, pretend they don't exist. And so I think that those messages, and then certainly, right, as you head into those teenage years, one, typically, I think a lot of women get the messaging, right, that like you don't really have a sex drive, like you're right, that's a male thing and that's not a you thing. But if it does exist, then clearly, like, you need to be the one that's hypervigilant all the time. You need to stay in control at all times. It's your job to, like, guard and protect and keep things from going too far. And certainly if for whatever reason you are attracted to anybody or do want to make certain, romantic or sexual things happen, then like something is wrong with you and your heart must be wrong with the Lord and you're not surrendering things to him in prayer and you're not like, I just think about so many journal entries, right? About like oh no, I kissed my boyfriend for too long and now I need to repent in my journal because I did the things, right? Like it just was so baked in. And so I feel like I said, was every single moment this terrible, horrible, shaming messages? Maybe not. But between the majority of the time it being avoidance, right? We don't talk about the things. And then lots of the flesh is sinful. It'll lead you astray. Your body's a liability. Yeah, I feel like it just brought together this like, you need, like if your body is sending you a signal, for the most part, you probably need to ignore it. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I resonate with that. And it fits perfectly into kind of like what we're talking about today, because, when we were thinking through like what would be a good topic, chronic pain, chronic disease, like this is an area that you specialize in, not only with clients, but have personal experience with also. And we were trying to think like, okay, how can we connect these two? There's not a lot of research that talks about like, purity culture directly causes, chronic pain or whatnot, but we do know that trauma does. Like they're the correlation between them. So
Yeah.
we're going to spend some time talking about that and how like the purity culture messages can play into it. But before we do that, maybe if you feel comfortable sharing just a little bit about your own experiences with chronic pain or illness, kind of like how did this show up for you? How does this show up for you? What's the impact on your daily life?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's wild when I was thinking about this and the overlap. And like you said, is all the research out there to show all those direct lines? Maybe or maybe not. But when I think back to like when this all started for me and what was happening in my life at the time that was directly related to my body. So I have been, I guess, experiencing chronic illness symptoms or chronic pain for almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years in this spring. I started experiencing chronic pain like right after my 16th birthday. And so contextually at the time, I'm in an abusive relationship in a high school youth group that I'm not aware of, right? Or would label it as that at the time. There is a genetic factor. I do have a parent and a sibling who also experienced like, if not the same diagnosis, but very similar pieces. But there just was a lot of like stress and going on. Clearly, purity culture was in full gear. And so I started experiencing like tons of like joint swelling and chronic pain and exhaustion. My mom at this point had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. So they were thinking that perhaps that's what I had. And I had very similar symptoms, but it kept showing up like the technical like blood marker that you need when they're doing all the testing. It would like show up negative. But yeah, especially in those early days, I had days where I like felt like I couldn't get out of bed. I was a musician. I played violin and piano, sang as well, but for specifically instruments, like I felt like I couldn't sit down and like play my instruments. Like I couldn't participate in class. And as a 16-year-old, right, who's most teenagers are very like self-conscious about their bodies and feel othered and don't feel like they fit the mold. It was this piece of like, what is wrong with me? Like, why can I not show up to my life the way other people can? Shortly after I got sick that first summer and they were still trying to navigate it and figure things out. Of course, I was signed up for like church work crew, which is like basically where you go and volunteer for 2 weeks to do like outside work projects at a summer camp. And I was nervous about going. I talked to my youth pastor about it. He's like, it's going to be fine. And he, for his part, was supportive, but he was also not there at every moment. And so my first round of shaming about my chronic illness, right, came in the context of youth group through church, right, which are all those messages like you're doing this for attention, you're exaggerating, you're like all of those pieces. And so within those first few months, right, shame was already a part of the equation that like, I need to prove my worth. I need to overexert myself. I need to outwork other people so they don't think I'm doing this for attention. They don't think I'm faking it. But I think what many people with chronic illness know, right, is that like if you don't listen to your body when it's trying to talk to you, it will then scream and yell at you and get your attention in a way that you really don't want, right? So that you're having a major symptom flare up and then like you literally can't, it's not just like, hey, I'm standing here and my knees are swollen, I should sit down. It's like, okay, now the next day I can't get out of bed. And so I think that those pieces of chronic exhaustion, I mean, I could sleep 10 hours a night and still be exhausted and probably take a nap in the middle of the day. Definitely like systemic pain in my entire body. I do laugh about this, like fibromyalgia, which is kind of where they landed for anybody who's ever walked like autoimmune disease world. Like they do a ton of testing, and then if they can't figure out what you have, they kind of just like slap fibro on there. I think somebody sent me an article one time that are like, there's over 200 symptoms associated with fibromyalgia. So I went through it and there's like, they're divided into 15 categories. I did the assessment for myself at one point and I was like, okay, well, I have at least one or two in every category. And certainly I would say of the, I looked back at my thing today in preparation for this, like technically 75 out of the 200 I've experienced at some point. I would consider like a third of that maybe something that I would experience fairly regularly, right? And then stuff that's like occasional or infrequent. And stuff that changes over time too, right? So stuff that's been fairly consistent for 20 years and then also as your body changes and hormones change, right? Like stuff that I'm experiencing for symptoms in my 30s, like dry mouth and dry eyes, right? That like I didn't necessarily wasn't dealing with when I was 19 or something. So, but it is something that is a daily thing. I try my best to take better care of myself than I did the first 5 years I was sick. So I try to, if I can, right, like not have the high flare-up days as often so that I can do more preventative stuff. But it is something you take into account every day, right? Like what activities can I say yes to? If this is a thing that potentially could cause a flare, am I with safe people? I mean, I've been like on vacation before and friends be like, let's go for this hike. And I'm like, oh, that feels too risky, like, especially with people you don't know well, right? I've thought about that at Disneyland. Like, am I going to be there with safe people that if I need to take a break or sit down or I'm in a lot of pain, like, do I feel comfortable being vulnerable enough in front of whoever I'm with? Because it is something I have to take into account, even for fun stuff. So,
yeah, that's really interesting. Appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you sharing all of that. And I'm curious for you, like when did you first start really making the connection between your chronic pain and your religious upbringing? Like what stood out to you and what did you notice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like many things, even in my own deconstruction process, like I think it was a slow burn. I didn't like come to one major realization and be like, oh, on this one June day when I was 24, like I finally put all the pieces of the puzzle together. I think I definitely, like I'd mentioned at the time, when I first got sick, I had this like abusive relationship that was kind of around that. It was part of my life for a couple of years. And then after that, actually, I ended up which is also not uncommon now that you're seeing the research, with some, certainly, if I didn't fit the full diagnostic criteria for anorexia, like definitely some disordered eating and restrictive behavior, because my life felt so out of control. I had all this negative, messaging about my body, right? I didn't want to gain the freshman 15 and all the bullshit stuff, right?
Yeah.
That people tell people. And so that was a way to control my environment when I had this huge vacuum, all this harm that had just happened, but I had no way of naming it, right? Because of course I wasn't actually his girlfriend. And so that became a part of my life. And within the next couple of years, I started to connect those pieces, right? Like, because of what happened, even if I wasn't naming it as abusive right away, right? I was like, that was a bad relationship. I felt out of control. This was an element of control. But I feel like it was a slow build. Like every couple of years, I would like add another piece to the puzzle, right? So, that's why I had disordered eating. Oh, that was actually an abusive relationship. That's why it was that bad. And then as I started working in Christian higher ed and realizing like, not just as a student leader when I was in Christian college, right? It was my job to like write people up for PDA and write people up for modesty, like dress code stuff. And then when I was a actual professional, like having to lead other teams and mentor people and starting to realize like life is a lot more complicated than what I was told it was, right? Like life doesn't always fit the formula. And now as I'm sitting with people more deeply in their stories and realizing like, on more and more issues, the formula doesn't work. Like it's too narrow, it's too rigid. And certainly that was true on a lot of things. I was starting to shift my perspective, obviously, on like sexuality and gender, right? In the queer community and politics. And I mean, a million things were starting to take off in the shifting. But certainly in the purity culture pieces, I think I started to realize like, and even in my own marriage, right? Like that was also another piece, right? Of like, I was told that this, if I followed the formula and did the right things, then I would be rewarded and it was all going to work out. And that's not true either. And so when I started to realize like, oh, all of this is connected. All of this is connected. And so as I hit my mid 20s and my late 20s and started to realize like, hi, I'm not well. And even if I'm not, I wasn't ignoring or in denial about my diagnosis the way I was in the first 5 years. So certainly in high school and college, or undergrad, I didn't take super good care of myself. But even in my 20s, I slept better, hypothetically, right? But I was still over functioning because there was so much pressure, right? To mentor at every opportunity and make sure you have a million people in your life that you're pouring into and like all the things. That when I reached the end of my time working in Christian higher ed and I was getting sick more often, and I say that sick like cold and the flu and strep and stuff like that. One of the only upsides to my chronic illness is that I actually have a hyperactive immune system. So I don't catch a lot of the like cold and flu germs that maybe a lot of other people do. I get my own regular symptoms on, daily, weekly basis, but I don't get that type of sick as often. In my last year working Christian higher ed at the end of my 20s, I was, 28 or 29, and I was like sick all the time. And I think at that time I was realizing, similar to I'm in the middle of reading our colleague Catherine's new book, A Thousand Tiny Paper Cuts, and I was just reading the section right where she was talking about like, oh, I was like in this place where I was like literally like throwing up so often because I was so stressed about the environment that I was in and the weight of purity culture, spiritual harm, high control religion, all the things that I think towards the ends of my 20s, that was the last piece of like, shit, like it's here too. Like even after I've done all this work and now I'm in therapy again and I'm working on all the things like doing EMDR and trying to get healthy. And I'm like, I'm still in the toxic environment. I'm still breathing in the toxins in the air and it is making me sick on so many levels. And I have to make a change. I have to make a change. I cannot live in these spaces anymore. I cannot work in these spaces anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I'm struck too, like some of the central messages of high control religion in general, but even purity culture is just like, distrusting your body, suppressing desires, cues, things like that. How do you think, do you see that as part of like showing up in some of your chronic issues of like, whether that was just ignoring them or not taking them as seriously, but like, what is the connection there, do you think?
Yeah. Well, and I think the hard thing too with chronic illness is like if you have symptoms on a daily basis, and again, have worked hard to try to keep my daily symptoms that are like on the lower level or more manageable, right? But they're there every day. And so the hard reality for many chronically ill people is like, if you have symptoms every day, like you can't just always rest every time you have a symptom. You can't take the day off. You can't take a sick day. And so there is that piece of like finding a middle ground balance of like, I can't, if I just rested every time I was tired, then like I would, sleep in way later than I do every day, right, on a weekday, and I would only work this many hours a day, but like that doesn't pay my bills. I've got a mortgage
Mhm.
and student loan payments. I have to buy groceries just like everybody else. And so you learn how to live with a certain amount of
Mhm.
pain and tension all the time. I'm thoroughly aware that like when I go get a massage, I always feel bad for my massage therapist because I'm like, I
Mm.
am sure that it is like a rock up here in my
Yeah.
shoulders and my neck. Like,
Yeah.
I wish I could make it better, but like that's my baseline all the time. And so I think there is some level of like you do have to ignore it or learn
Mhm.
to live with it.
Mhm.
But I think very much to connect it back to that concept in, high control religion, that all or nothing thinking.
Yeah.
I think what we don't learn in the middle of that is like nuance, right? So how do we find when to listen? When do we need to pause? When do we need to take a break? I mean, that was true for sure if I relate it back to the whole like eating disorder thing, right? It was like, here are a couple of good foods and then everything else is
Mhm.
bad, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think about even that abusive relationship, like as complicated as that was, right? There were some certain parts of that were just like normal human development, right? So even though he wasn't a
Mhm.
safe person, my like teenage attraction to him and like I wish I could be his girlfriend and you know what I mean? Like ended up making out on some couch in the middle of the night and like things like that
Mm.
that are just like human things.
Yeah.
But being able to tap into my body, right? Like, and say, like, okay, this part was okay, but
Mhm.
he is not a
Yeah.
safe person, and here's
Yeah.
why. There was no room or education for that. Clearly, I didn't have any idea at the time what. I mean, not that I can diagnose him officially or anything, but like my guess now as an adult that he probably would meet the diagnostic criteria for like schizoid or schizotypal personality disorder too. So there was a lot of layers for him. But there was no language for that, right? It just was either like, I can do this
Mhm.
and it's amazing. Now I'm caught up in the moment, or it's all bad and I made a
Yeah.
horrible mistake and I hate myself for the whole thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that nuance of like, how do we know when to listen to our bodies and when we have to push through a little bit, but then follow up with some good care? Like, I didn't have any
Mhm.
of that. And so it's been
Yeah.
very trial and error learning that
Mhm.
over time as an adult. Because, yeah, just in those early years, it was so much just like, it's all bad. If it's saying anything to me, it's probably
Yeah.
bad. So I should ignore it.
Yeah. I'm I'm really struck that like I think what a lot of people coming out of high control religions, and that includes purity culture, like it is such a high stress environment, and
Mhm.
of course you wouldn't know any different, right? Part of the gotcha of complex trauma is like, oh, this was our norm, right? Here's our
Right.
baseline, right? And
Right.
it's this high level of stress, and there's like a whole bunch of people that don't have that, right? Like
Right.
they have a
Right.
totally different baseline that they're coming from,
Yes.
and so I think I know for myself, like part of like I've had several moments where like finally like the stress has decreased enough or the
Hmm.
inflammation has decreased enough that
Hmm.
it's like, oh, like you're met with like different
Hmm.
symptoms and like different
Yeah.
experiences and you start to realize like, oh, I've been at this level of stress or pain or whatever for a very, very long time.
Hmm.
And that's just been my norm. And I think a lot of people in these more complex, traumatic
Hmm.
circumstances, which high
Yeah.
control religion, domestic violence, relationships,
Right.
intimate partner violence fits
Yeah.
squarely in those like diagnostic categories. And it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, when you are at this high level of stress all the time,
Hmm.
constantly hyper vigilant, constantly,
Hmm.
stress level 100, like that has an impact on your body over time, and that's what I'm hearing from you. I know I've
Hmm.
experienced that. I've so many other clients too, where they're like, yeah, I just was under stress all the time. And this is
Hmm.
the impact of it, the long-term impact.
Yeah. It's a lot of pressure to feel like you have to make the right decision all the time, right? Like everything is high stakes, everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you feel like that hypervigilance is just present in every area of your relationship, right? Because they talk to you about that inside high control religion, right? Like you need to surrender every part of your life to God, right? Everything you do, everything you say, every thought you have, all needs to be filtered through this. And so, I even have compassion for that girl, right? Like sweet, earnest me who just like so badly wanted to do the right thing, like so badly wanted to live a God honoring life, so badly wanted
Yeah.
to have it figured out. And just like the messiness of being a human being was not a part of that equation. And so, right, inevitably, when our humanity pops up, as it does for us all, certainly in different ways, it manifests differently. But as that popped up, right, I had no clue what to do with that other than go back to willpower, right? How can I get this under control? How can I get this under control? How can I dominate and have victory over whatever this thing is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's so much there. And I appreciate you bringing in just the black and white thinking aspect and the lack of nuance, because that, I know that shows up so much. And then that does make things so difficult down the road for then listening to our bodies and feeling like you can trust that. And so on that note, like we definitely the long-term impact is, I mean, it's a tremendous toll on our bodies. And
Yep.
specifically, I want to ask about shame, just especially from a nervous system, trauma perspective and all of that.
Yeah.
So like what does it mean when we say that shame is both an emotional and a physiological state?
Yeah. Yeah, I think this was something that was such a new thing for me to start to learn in therapy, particularly like in my late 20s when I actually found a therapist who like understood religious trauma, right? And purity culture and like all the impacts of those things. Shocker, it like made a huge difference. And I don't know but I think maybe this is perhaps a part of the like compartmentalization or the disintegration that happens of like the whole of who we are. So the language I often use around this, right, is like separating, right, like mind, right, our heart or our emotion and our body. And obviously if the church is saying like the heart is, and the flesh are deceitful and are going to lead you astray and blah blah blah, like I think about those as like I voted them off the island a long time ago. Right, like made them get it, like no, you are not allowed here, you are only going to bring confusion or harm or whatever. And so oftentimes, clearly, I know that I still had emotions, but I would think about them in this very like ethereal, nebulous way. It wasn't connected to anything. Versus now, as an adult, right? And as I've shifted into this career path to realize, like, oh, there are somatic sensations that go with my emotions, which is why right now they currently feel so unbearable because I don't like how that feels inside my body. And so for things like shame, right, when I was thinking about like what are my clues that I'm feeling shame, now that I pay attention, my cheeks get really hot. Also my earlobes. That's like a thing for me. My earlobes get really hot. I feel like a surge of energy for me that like comes from like my core. Like I can feel it like rise super fast. Like almost like if you were thinking like a rise of like bile in your stomach or something like that. I like feel that energy, that fight or flight, right? I need to either get ready to like verbally defend or like get the hell out of here. I also feel like my lungs shrivel up. Like I can't take a deep breath. My throat gets tight. I'm just a crier in general. I always like laugh. My clients when they're crying, they're like, "I'm sorry, I'm crying." I'm like, "Listen, I'm a crier. Any high scale emotion for me, happy, mad, sad, tired, whatever it is. If it's a 7 or higher on a scale 1 to 10, I'm probably crying about it. So no, I will probably cry with you at some point. So like, no embarrassment. Yeah, tears certainly, obviously, are a quick indication, right, or a lump in my throat of like, ooh, I feel really uncomfortable. Ooh, I feel shame. And as wild as it is, or it seems counterintuitive, right? Like being able to pay attention to those cues and name like, oh, that's what's happening right now and create like acceptance for myself. Like this is a normal part of being a human. It sucks and I hate it, but it's normal. Allows me to have a little bit of access, like back to that like prefrontal cortex, right? Like our logical decision maker of our brain, instead of like adding to Dr. Kristen Neff talks about it in her like self-compassion work, right? Like the over-identification of like, once we notice that we're having a feeling, if we then judge ourselves for having the feeling, right? Like now we've magnified it and it just feels even more like out of control. And now we're caught up in I refer to it as like my shame cyclone. Like I literally feel like I get picked up and I'm like caught in the movement. And now I'm stuck in it until the vortex dies, right? Till the cyclone lands me down somewhere and I've like, had a really horrible fight with my husband, and I've like torn this up, and now I got to go do all this repair work.
Well, and it strikes me too that, what you're talking about there with these sensations, like emotions are sensations in our bodies, right? We're talking about chronic pain, chronic illness. That's a lot of bodily sensation. And then purity culture, which is like cut off from all of that, right?
Correct.
And so, yeah, I'm just curious for you as you've done your own work or worked with clients, like, how does that almost like a spiritual hierarchy, right, of like not being in your body contribute to that like disembodiment or lack of trust in bodily signals that impacts chronic pain and chronic illness, as well as, all of the messages of purity culture?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, again, we circle back to that, like when you have chronic illness, the hard part is like being in your body is hard. Like there are lots of things, right, that go with that and likely will stay hard. Obviously, I know for some people as they do certain work, like certain symptoms or whatever they may experience, some like healing or alleviation of certain things. And for many people, though, right, like this is your new reality from now on. You do your best to manage your symptoms and minimize flare ups, but like it is a part of your from now on reality unless somebody finds a cure for whatever it is that is your particular diagnosis. And so it is hard, right? We can't go back to this or feed ourselves this lie of like, but once you learn to live back in your body, it's all going to be really great. Like, it's not always going to be really great. And actually, as weird as that was, when I could come to accept that, that felt better because when anytime anybody would tell me the other things or like, give you the spiritual bypassing, like, I'll pray for your healing. I was like, that's just like that toxic positivity bullshit. And I just legitimately hate that. Because, yeah, most of us have to continue with chronic illness, right, or disability to live in a body that does have pain or limitations, and that's not fun. But I think being able to say, like, my body has good information for me. And I think as weird as this was, like, when I reappealed to the, like, cognitive part of myself, right, to be like, Nicole, would you want to live an experience where you are consciously, regularly cutting off a third of the information that you could have from making an informed decision about what's best, about what's wisest? Because that's what happens when you cut your body off and you just say, all of this is bad. None of the information or data that you provide for me is good. And I refuse to listen to any of it. And so it would be like taking a puzzle and saying like, I'm just going to take a handful and here's a giant third of the puzzle pieces and I'm just going to like throw them in the garbage and hope that it turns out fine. Like, you are missing important things. And so just like emotions are not always easy to feel, obviously certain cognitive thoughts are not always fun to think. Living in a body is not always fun, even outside of chronic illness, right? If we're sick and we eat something we shouldn't and we're puking that back up, it's not a fun sensation. But your body is doing its job, right? Yeah. It's doing its job. And that's that kind of like body neutrality piece. And I think that for people with chronic illness is also important, right? Of like, I can't always be body positive because it's not always fun. It's not always fun. Emotions aren't always fun. Living in a body is not always fun, especially one that's chronically ill or disabled. Yeah. But my body is doing its best. My body is not a liability. It's not my enemy. That feels like an important thing to like circle back to.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I just appreciate like the non-pathologizing approach where you're not looking at yourself through this lens of there's something broken or wrong or flawed or maladaptive or whatever other words we as clinicians hear folks use, And I also appreciated, this is kind of a sidebar, this isn't one of the questions we were going to ask, but just you even use the word acceptance and the value in that. Interestingly enough, I actually just not that long ago was reading some peer-reviewed article, I can't remember the journal, but about acceptance and commitment therapy and the value of acceptance, specifically with chronic pain and the efficacy of that. And anyway, I've been very interested in ACT for quite some time, but didn't realize until recently specifically how actually that has been shown to be quite effective with chronic pain, evidently. There's a lot of research that's coming out with that particular modality, I guess.
Yes, because then you're not, as hard as it is, just like with emotion, right? Then you're not fighting it. You're riding the wave. And again, the wave may not be fun. And I'll give a very specific example, like in my own pain. So like occasionally if I've been holding a lot of pain, and a couple of times a year, something that will happen for me will be like, I'll just start shaking. And I'm assuming for somebody on the outside, it would look to them like, is she having a seizure? Does she have epilepsy? Something like that. But it's just like my body has been holding so much tension. It's not wild, but it's like this. And I feel like my teeth are chattering, even though I'm not cold. And for so many years, I would try to like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, stop that, stop that, stop that. And obviously that just
Makes it
prolonged
worse.
like
Yeah.
the experience of how long I was feeling that way. And then also provided more chronic pain on the back end too, right? Or the next day because I was clenched for so long. And even though it is not pleasant, but it is one of my body's ways of saying, like, you have been holding too much lately. This is not going to be fun for the next 5 minutes. But if you let it happen,
Yeah.
it is an atypical way of turning, right? Like opening the valve and releasing some of that pressure.
Yeah.
It's not fun. It's not a pleasant experience. But if I can trust it and let it roll through my body, then it makes it better. Right. So it is that acceptance piece of like, this is a part of my reality. It's not fun, but it's going to be okay. And that way, then I can just, not make it worse, that over identification. Because adding the shame or contempt for yourself on top of it to be like, right, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get my stuff together? I'm so weird. My body is so terrible. I'm so miserable. It just adds to it. It just adds to it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it feels almost paradoxical on one hand, but it's like the harder you resist it, the worse it actually is going to be. And like you said, it's not pleasant, but also, not fighting it, riding the wave. So this may actually speak to the next question a little bit, but I'm curious, how have you or people you work with learned to rebuild a relationship with their body after, being told for so many years that it's dangerous or sinful or broken?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many layers. And obviously, I think there are things that obviously we can help each other with over time that are themes. And obviously, there's also stuff that's like very individualized depending on what your experience is. I would say, once again, it's been a long, slow burn. I've done lots of like phases of work of like reimagining my relationship with my body. Also, because bodies continue to change, right? Like wherever I'm at now, my body will be in a different place in 10 years versus in 30 years, right? And having to like shift and continue to adapt will be important. Just like the same, right? Like my perspective on sexuality is different than it was 5 years ago, which is different than 15 years ago. And I'm hoping, right, I will be in a different place, or things that I'm still unpacking and unlearning now will feel more easy 5 or 10 years from then, right? Like there's this state of becoming and evolving, I think, that fits with all of that. For me, the first layer was really about, before I could even touch some of the sex and sexuality stuff, I had to start more basic than that, which was like some of the just like diet culture, fat shaming, like general disregard for bodies. I think Brene Brown talks about in her very first book when she was still a professor and was like teaching, there was this story about how like she asked students to like bring magazines in, and they were going to like do this collage one day, right? And say like, okay, I want you to make this collage of like your ideal body, your body image, or how you would like to present yourself to the world, right? So everybody's like cutting things out of magazines and creating this collage, la la la, right? And people are working fast, lots of options. Halfway through class, she's like, okay, now I want you to stop and I want you to pivot and I want you to go through these magazines and pick things that you feel like actually represent your current body as it really is.
Yeah.
And everybody's sitting there. There's a lot less scissor movement, a lot less busy, a lot, right? Like people are just sitting in the emotion of like, either I just can't find things and that's weird, or like, right, it brings up that shame of like, what I'm seeing in front of me is not how we are. And she made the point of like, we tell ourselves we need these ideals, but literally you had to go through here and chop up 25 different women and create a fake woman in order to create your ideal. And that's what you're holding yourself to. And she talks about that with shame all the time, right? Like we think perfectionism, creating the perfect image, that everything about our body is perfect, that's what's going to make us not feel shame. And the reality is like perfectionism is a function of shame. It is shame.
Yeah.
And so for me, it started in that simple space of like, what if I didn't make the list about all the things I wish were different about my body anymore? What if I could stop making that list as frequently? Now, of course, we still live in a community and a world and a society that tells us there are things with our bodies that, that are wrong with our bodies all the time. So we still have to like live in that space. But I used to be super good at, if I could magically wave a wand and change one thing about my body, what would it be? But then that list becomes 3, and then it becomes 5, and then it becomes 10. And I remember years ago in therapy when I had restarted and like standing in my bathroom sobbing, and it took me hours, but I took an expo marker and I started just writing on my mirror, what are things I like about my body, even if it's little silly stuff, right? Or neutral. I don't feel any negative feeling about this part of my body. I like this little beauty mark on the inside of my elbow. I like
Yeah.
the color of my hair. I like, right? Like it didn't have to be this, like, I love everything about my body, but even the small stuff. And I would just say those things out loud to myself regularly to start to change the tape. That was a really big deal. And so for some people to let them know, like sometimes we have to start back further before we can go into that like deeper work or unpack how we feel about like certain parts of our like sexual anatomy or things like that. That may feel super vulnerable at first, and it's okay to scale back and start with the basics.
Yeah. I think that's helpful. If we were to look at like this idea of embodied healing for survivors of purity culture who also live with chronic pain or chronic illness, like what are some of the things that you work on with clients or even from your own work of like to, embodied healing? What would that look like? Especially when we're dealing with two things here.
Yeah, definitely coming back to that concept we talk a lot about, again, the body positivity versus body neutrality. You don't have to like love every part of your human experience. You don't have to love every part of like how your body shows up to the world, because it will continue to be uncomfortable or painful or messy or put limitations on our life. And that's just the truth of it. So back to that space of acceptance. I also think that like, at least for me, I'm a big reader. So like we live in a country, right? And a lot of like capitalism and ableism shows up in our world all the time, which makes you feel like you're the broken one. And so I think oftentimes either connecting with other people who are walking a similar journey or like reading other resources to just remind yourself that like there's a system in place that makes all of this really hard is super important. One of my favorite books that I like to recommend to people it's called What Doesn't Kill You? A Life with Chronic Illness, Lessons from a Body in Revolt by Tessa Miller. And she does share like her personal chronic illness journey as well. But also she does a ton of super good research about the healthcare system in America and obviously like impacts on marginalized bodies and like all of these things I think that really help remind people like you are doing the best you can in a world that was not made for your body. And at some point, like we all are going to become ill or disabled at some point, right? The inevitability is that at some point we will all pass away. Like we will all die and our bodies will not work the same ways they used to. But again, I think it makes people feel vulnerable. And so for the most part, we've got that, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And if you just work hard, then you can get over anything kind of a deal versus like, hey, this is my regular life. This is my new normal from now on. And can I remind myself of like, my body is not, I mean, yes, there are limitations and things that are struggle, but like part of what makes it way worse than it needs to be is the system itself, not me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important. Like, it's obviously like there's levels of responsibility that we can and should take for ourselves, but also like recognizing that some of the limitations or where we need to give ourselves permission to make accommodations is because of this system that we're living in, and what we've come out of too,
Right. And that zoomed out perspective, I think, helps with so many pieces, right? When on all the things that we've been talking about, zooming back to the shame, when we realize that it's not just us, right? Like the patterns are there. Clearly the internet is, full of all sorts of garbage, but the magic of technology, right, is that it does allow us to find each other, to be having this conversation right now, to be able to start to recognize these patterns, even if, the official scientific research is just starting to get into the groove and starting to create those connections. Like it's starting to name patterns we've all been seeing now for years and we all get to talk about together. And so when we zoom back out, I think it takes some of the isolation, right, that makes the shame really painful and helps remind us like, I am not the only person walking through this. I have my individual experiences, right? I still have to manage my individual health in whatever ways that is true for me. But also what makes it way harder is that we live in a society that does not set us up for success.
Absolutely.
I agree. I do think it's so helpful to just see that larger, zoomed out, like societal, systemic lens. Like, I really appreciate that. I'm curious, what does it mean to you now to experience your body as good or worthy after years of being taught otherwise?
Yeah. I think the biggest one, the word I used or the two words I used the most frequently was liability and defective. Those were like my big shame words. I carried them for so many years. And when you carry them for so many years, like even now I've got a little tears in my eyes as I'm thinking about that version of me, even from 10 years ago. It was so sharp, that shame, right? It was so suffocating. It was so heavy. And learning the concept of self-compassion was like game changer for me. And so to now, instead of saying, right, like my body is a liability or she's defective, or I would say it's defective, there's that other like separating myself at right now would say like she is resilient.
Yeah.
And I want to say, I would have to relook up the artist. I think it's Tessa Violet and like Brie. I forget what Bree's last name is, but they have this song that's called My Body's My Buddy. And it's like so silly, maybe like when you hear the title, but like I can sing that song now and like actually mean it and be like, there's this line in the song that's like, from my birth to my grave, every step I've taken, my body came. And so this piece of like, she is actually the closest relationship I have. There's nobody else who has like intimately ridden through every step of my life with me. And instead of seeing her as my enemy, like, can we be friends? Can we be partners? Like, none of it's going to be easy, but just like, you think about like with my husband, I have this great relationship. We clearly know life is not easy. There have been many things that have been hard, but it is easier when we do it together. And to be able to shift some of that, I'm so grateful to have an external relationship that reminded me of that like, could I shift some of that posture inwards towards myself? And so many things, right? Like she deserves food she enjoys. She deserves sleep and rest. She deserves to buy new clothes if her body is changed so that she doesn't have to continue to make herself uncomfortable, telling herself she shouldn't have put on 5 pounds, right? Like she's not a liability. She's not a stumbling block. She is not a ruiner of my life and stealing of joy and experiences. I just, try to like take a step back from that now and remind myself like she deserves different things, and that like the alarm signals that she sends now, like those are wisdom, and I will pay attention. Even my job right before the thing, I've told Laura this before, I took a executive assistant job in between like my 2 coaching jobs. So here at CTRR, and I had a similar one at another company. But in the meantime, right, because there's still bills to pay, I had taken this other job. And even though it wasn't a religious institution, what I started to realize so fast is like the hurry, the scurry, everything is fast paced. We don't listen to our bodies. We don't stop for lunch. We've been telling ourselves we need to go to the bathroom for an hour and we don't do it. Like everything feels high stakes, right? We can't just. And so I started to realize, even within a couple of months, right? Like my alarm bells were ringing. And I started to be like, so even if this isn't overtly about religion and denying my body, this is a space that would require me to deny my body and stop listening to it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be here. Like, I will find something else. I did all my due diligence to make sure this was an okay space. And sometimes you don't know it until you're in it. Again, that piece of like, I couldn't know in advance. And I'm now allowed to pivot and make a different decision. So, I didn't force myself to stay to prove something to somebody like a younger version of me would have, right? I need to endure this. There's the other, right, religious piece. I don't have to endure it. I can just be done. I can look for something new. I can just trust, or don't have to stick it out and maybe it'll get better and it'll prove something better about me if I just endure. No, I can just trust my body is speaking really loud and I will listen to her.
Yeah. I love that self-compassion piece that you hit on. I feel like that was really like foundational. Before I even really understood trauma, I was like in the self-compassion, like Kristen Neff's work was incredibly helpful, just starting to recognize what is it even that I'm saying to myself so that I'm not fighting against myself all the time.
Yes.
And then from there, like so many other things. And I think about like when the concept of embodiment was introduced to me, which as we're recording, we're talking probably 7-8 years ago or whatever. And thinking, oh yeah, I know I have a body, I'm embodied, whatever. But then actually like practicing that is really difficult. And
It
it
is.
turns out, like in a lot of cases, it gets worse before it gets better, because embodiment isn't actually about feeling good. It's about
Yeah.
like you feel everything, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I'm thinking, like if we're looking at some like practicalities of like how, like if people are like starting to recognize, oh, maybe this is something that I've been experiencing, like what are the practices that you kind of help people navigate with, to maybe even realize that there could be a chronic issue, but also like as they're starting to recognize this is a thing for me, like what are some of the healing practices that you recommend to
Yeah,
clients?
for sure. So yes, the whole like being embodied is really hard, and feeling more things, especially if you consider yourself to be a deep feeler, which I do. Like, it is hard to feel more. Already
Mm.
feels so costly to live in the world that we live in. A big piece of that for me was like changing my relationship with exercise. Obviously, as with my stories I've talked about, like viewing exercise for so long. I was never an athlete. I suck at every sport there ever was. So like that was never like, oh, I'm doing this for fun with a game I enjoy. It was always about, right, like burning calories and staying thin and la la la. And so I remember like after I turned 30 being like, what about if like I started to figure out ways to like move my body in a way that actually brought me joy, not about calorie burning, and have like we talk about in our coping skills, right? And just in general in the mental health world, I need to have varieties of options so that I can pivot and adapt with whatever my body is capable of that day, right? It makes room for if I only find one thing and then I can't do that thing, right? Then I feel paralyzed again. And so some of that was just like, can I just like start going for a walk? And that adds in some of those natural, like, orienting skills that we talk about, right? Of like, oh, the beautiful sky and the pretty flowers and the green trees, or at least, for us, that's our winter and not our summer. But the pieces of just like, oh, like I'm seeing things and I'm listening to calming music and I'm taking deeper breaths, and like that natural regulation is just kind of happening while I'm out and about. And I don't need to be working towards anything. But when I put my feet on the pavement, it just soothes. Certainly just doing like stretching if I don't have capacity to go do much else, but like, can you sit down and go on YouTube and like do a little stretching video for like 5 minutes? And if I need to cry and let some stuff go while I do it, or modify whatever the person on the screen is doing because my body has its limitations, like, yes, make modifications. The point is not to like achieve the thing. The point is to be with your body. And then like for the more like I need to release something, right? I feel a wave of anger and I need it to roll through my body. I feel anxious and I need to do something with it. For me, because I come from the like performing arts world, was I found somebody who does like fun, like dance workouts. Cause I was thinking to myself, like, when is the only time I've really enjoyed it? I was like, oh, like when I was doing musical theater, like dance rehearsal days were really fun. So if I can do a workout to the soundtrack from Wicked or Ladies of the 80s or Disney music or something that just feels like more fun and whimsical, that makes it way better for me. And so it just allows me to be present in a different way. Certainly, I think for many people, also adding in an element of like creativity and what does that look like to be aware of whatever creative practice you're doing and how that connects to your body also feels important. So for some people, that's reclaiming music or a certain art medium or writing. Yeah, I think all of those can be, or even just being quiet, right? Like the contemplative practices that don't have to include like the utmost for his highest or Beth Moore Bible studies, or you know what I mean, like those kind of daily devotional things.
Yeah.
Like, what does it look to be quiet and do just like the check in with your body, right? Like, what do I notice that's happening inside my body right now without judgment, right? That neutral mindfulness, I think, is just the sweetest, coolest thing. And then we can adjust, right? It doesn't have to be this like, oh, I need to create this regimented workout program, and then I need to make sure that I'm sitting down and doing my new journaling every day, and I need to do this and I need to do that. It's like, what do I need in the moment that maybe I haven't been paying attention to? Do I need to go get a drink of water? Have I been clenching my jaw and I just need to like massage my face a little bit here, right? Do I need to stand up and stretch? Do I just need to like stand up out of this chair if I'm feeling stuck and like go someplace else in my house or walk to the mailbox and come back? It doesn't have to be big dramatic changes. I think the learning to check in with yourself more often and just ask yourself, what do I need? And whatever the answer is okay. Is like the big shift for me, as opposed to ignore or power through.
Yeah. And that makes sense. Like it's what I'm hearing is like an individualized piece, which is so true for
Mm-hmm.
so many people. Like, we go online or watch YouTube videos or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I want to get my self-care plan from this person. So I do these 10
Mm-hmm.
things. And certainly that can be helpful, but
Right.
that's their self-care plan, right? And so
Correct.
every person is going to have to really, like, part of navigating chronic
Mm-hmm.
issues of any sort is really
Mm-hmm.
getting in touch with like learning what my
Mm-hmm.
stressors are when my body flares up and what are the things that feel helpful. I mean, checking with basic needs is usually
Right.
universally like
Right.
something that most people need, but then like what a break looks like for me might be different for
Mm-hmm.
you, and that's okay. And being comfortable with that to say, yeah, like I have to sit down, but my friend has to lay down. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. All
Right.
of those things. It's so individualized, but it really requires that like tender inventory of your own body, like being connected there, I think is so important.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. I may love to go take a hot bubble bath at the end of the day. You may hate
Yeah.
that.
That
Some
sounds
days I'm not.
terrible to me.
Yeah. Some days I don't have capacity to go anywhere and I need to stay home. And then other days
Yes.
my friend will call me and be like,
Yeah.
do you want to go to the burlesque show next weekend? And I'll be like, yes,
Amazing.
I do want to do that. Right. So like there's
Yeah.
just all sorts of options to say like I can reclaim, reframe,
Yes.
right?
I
Like
love that.
somatic or spiritual or relational. There's so many ways that we
Hmm.
can like heal and reconnect with ourselves and
Yeah.
create new patterns. But so much of that,
Mm.
again, is releasing the rigidity. I have to do it this way. This is what healing looks like all the time in the exact same way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really powerful. So this next question as we wrap up is kind of a
Mhm.
reflection question.
Yeah.
But if you could go back and tell your younger self one thing about your body, what would it
Mm.
be?
Mm. Even now, as I hear you say it out loud, and when I read it in advance, like there was just like this like wave, like a ripple of emotion through my chest in this like, gosh, such deep compassion. 'Cause so quickly I can
Mm.
call to mind, right? Like, all the IFS are like 12-year-old me, right? And 16-year-old
Mm.
me and 21-year-old me who's brand new married and has no idea what the hell she just signed up for, right? And is trying to unpack the things. And I think what I would just tell any of them is like, I know you are working so damn hard to do it right, to do it perfect. And I know it feels like it's not enough. And it's not enough, not because you are failing, but because the system is failing. The system has failed
Mm.
you. Not everything is that black and white. And that's actually okay. I know it feels dangerous, but it's actually okay. And you
Mm.
are smart enough and wise enough to learn how to navigate the nuance. You don't need the rules, you don't need the formula.
Mm.
You, on your own, will learn to be wise enough to figure it out anyways, even without those things.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, even as you say that, and I think I'm like, kind of reflecting on our entire conversation, it strikes me how high control religion can in some ways feel like such a nice like way to cope with chronic illness, because not
Yes.
only does it disconnect you from your body, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
this rigid plan of what you should or should not
Mm-hmm.
do, and then it puts the
Mm-hmm.
blame on you if there's any
Mm-hmm.
problems with it, but it also
Yeah.
gives you 17 more tasks to do to try
Yeah.
to feel better or
Yeah.
whatever. And it's
Yep.
like, yeah, it keeps you away from your body, but it
Mm-hmm.
like piles on more shame. And so I feel like, and purity culture is part of that. And so, yeah, part of that healing then is like being able to invite your body back in and
Mm-hmm.
recognize like it's, yeah, exactly what you're saying. It's not actually about tasking more, and doing it perfectly. It's actually about, almost the opposite, like slowing
Right.
down, doing less,
Yes.
tuning in. That's
Yes.
huge. Yeah, high control religion really, yeah, really can take away a lot
Sure can.
from somebody. Yeah. So on that note, I'm curious
Mhm.
what gives you hope about how,
Mm.
conversations around the body and faith and healing, chronic illness, all this are changing.
Yeah. It was so funny. I had to like sit with that for a minute. I don't consider myself like a naturally positive person, but I feel like I am a person who tries to be hopeful. And I think there's a lot of like grit that goes with hope. I don't think about hope as like this fluffy, positive, like cotton candy feeling. It feels very gritty to me. But quite frankly, one of them was like that this job exists, like that we get to be on this team
Mm,
at CTRR and like
yeah.
something like this I couldn't have even fathomed like doing with my life 10 years ago. And like now it's real. And like we all get to be connected to each other and our clients get to be connected to us. And like that makes me really happy, right? We're naming patterns. We have people writing books and doing podcasts. And, you know, I have a close friend of mine who went to the same Christian college with me, and she just started working on her doctorate, and she's going to do her research thesis on religious trauma. Like that stuff just feels so cool and exciting. And I think in the midst of that, what I try to take away from it, and this is obviously when we zoom out again, right? Like there's a lot of really hard things in the world right now. And there's a lot of, you know, when I think about, you know, our political climate and Christian nationalism and all the things that just bring up a lot of frustration, you know, that when that happens and I get frustrated against very real, clearly like harm and injustice that comes towards so many like marginalized identities. And I'm agitated that people like haven't figured it out yet. Like I figured it out. Why haven't you figured it out? The flip side of that is like, I am hopeful because change is possible and I am proof of that. There are more me's out there in the world. Now, will everybody change? No. Will some people not change in the ways you want or on the timeline you want or as much as you want? Totally. But that's not my job. My job is to like be open and available to those who are in that journey, to people who like me or like my clients are in a space where they're like ready to do some shifting and to be available to them. And I want to be a soft place to land for them. And that for those, like we work with people across the spectrum of people who've like walked away from religion or faith entirely, all the way to people, right, who like are still working on rebuilding or reclaiming some pieces, but having to unlearn some pieces that feel harmful or toxic to them. And I love that even in that space, right, with our clients who are saying, I do want to keep some of this, but they can realize like, I don't have to choose between the somatic and the spiritual, right? This is a both and situation, not an either or. And that when I hold shame and contempt for my body, that's actually really poisonous to me. And so I get to, right, like in the way all the different analogies we talked about today, right? Like invite my body back to the island and like listen to her input, or those puzzle pieces that I like threw in a closet and decided not to look at. Like I can go get them and like start putting them back into the puzzle, right? And like paying attention to what they have to say. And I think so much of the fullness of being able to live in our lives is being able to hold those both and tensions and releasing that really black and white either or thinking. So that gives me hope both for those who are, like we said, choosing to do some type of reconstruction, and also for those who have deconstructed and decided they want to release it. But I love that common theme that I think is pretty consistent across the board, which makes my heart happy.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate this conversation because I think like maybe even on the outset, people are like, well, why, you know, chronic pain and purity culture, high control religion. And, you know, I think all of us here in this conversation probably have some interest in research. And, you know, so we're seeing different things, and we've all worked with clients long enough to be able to start to anecdotally put this stuff together. But I just think it's nice to be able to at least open a door to say, hey, there are some correlations here. And it's not that purity culture directly causes chronic pain or illness, but like when you're in that braced hypervigilant state for years or decades, like your body holds things as a way to survive. And part of that healing process is like the unclench and release. But after decades of clenching, like that can leave a lot of impact. And I think it's like, I remember the first time I started to recognize that and understand it, like, even though that's a cognitive thing, there is a somatic shift that happens when we can have conversations like this that remove the shame and then introduce compassion and just say like, hey, actually, this might be kind of normal for like a normal result of some really messed up stuff that happened. And it's not because you did something, it's because like your body was protecting you, and that level of hypervigilant protection can sometimes have a cost, and then we have to accommodate for maybe a very long time. But we can do it, you know? So I'm grateful to have conversations like this and just your openness to sharing your own story and how you work with clients, because I think that's really helpful. So on that note, if people want to get in touch with you or work with you or follow along, where can they find you? Are you taking clients? What do you where can people get in touch?
Yes, absolutely. So I do work at Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery. So if you were to head over to the CTRR website, and certainly you can, why don't you look at here's our team or meet our practitioners or the list that says like work with a practitioner and available practitioners, you would see my face there. Could obviously read a little bit more about me if that felt important to you. Also, if you were to even like go check out the CTRR Instagram page,
Yes.
I try to regularly like write for the platform. And so you'll see me kind of tagged Nicole Clifton in your corner. I think yesterday, like a blog post that we put up about like, hey, how do we set boundaries with family members for the holidays? And like, here's maybe some scripts you could
Yes.
try if you're having a hard time thinking about how to
Mhm.
phrase some of those. Like, hey, I'd rather actually not talk about that at the Christmas table dinner situation.
I
So
love
yeah,
it.
I am taking new clients. I do believe in the new year. This probably isn't posted yet, but I would probably have a sliding scale spot or two open up in the new year, which should be really great. And then, yeah, definitely am taking new clients. So feel free to follow that professional Instagram page if you want. You can always find me through the CTRR stuff.
Awesome.
And we try to do a lot of cross collaboration that way.
Yes, I'll make sure that all of that information ends up in the show notes so that people can easily get in contact with you. But definitely, follow along with Nicole's work. She does a lot of contributions to the social media for CTRR. So yes, go follow there, find her, and yeah, set up a free inquiry call. So once again, Nicole, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. It's been really lovely to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you both. Yeah, it's been so
So
great.
thank you once again to Nicole Clifton for such an amazing conversation about purity culture and chronic illness, chronic pain, chronic disease. I'm so glad that we're having conversations about purity culture that span beyond just kind of what we typically think of. And I think this is one of them. So very grateful for everything that Nicole had to share with us today. And if you're interested in finding out more about Nicole or working with her as a practitioner at the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, you can find all of her information in the show notes. So make sure and give her a follow, reach out to her, tell her thank you for the podcast. And yeah, we're just really grateful that she came on today. So with that, all God's people said, amen.
Amen.